This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Dustin Hoffman.
Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman. Today is Election Day, Tuesday, November the 5th, 2024. Make sure you're exercising your right to go out and make your choices. Coming up later on in the program, we'll hear from agmarket.net for our closing markets. But first, let's go ahead and catch up with Iowa Ag Secretary Mike Naig as we talked with him last week about the situation that unfolded with Pure Prarie Poultry and what IDALS had to do to take control of the situation. That is the situation with Pure Prarie Poultry and the situation it brought to Minnesotans, Iowans, and Wisconsin people as well. And, you know, we got an update yesterday. Maybe we can delve in a little more as to what happened. What did Iowa have to do on their side of the coin to kind of make sure the farmers there were taken care of and to make sure that, you know, the poultry situation was taken care of? Because obviously it was a economic standpoint for the farmers. It was a animal welfare standpoint for the birds involved. What's the situation as we have it right now?
Yeah, you nailed it, right? It's all of those things. Let me just say top line, this is an incredibly unfortunate situation. And there's lots of questions. I think a lot of reasonable people can look at this and say, why did this happen? How did this happen? You've got there needs to be some answers here, both in terms of how did Pure Prarie management and ownership operate, and how did they end up in this situation? But two, the U.S. government, the USDA, had made a significant investment in this facility, $46 million worth of grants and guaranteed loans. And again, I think it's very reasonable to look and say, what happened? How did we get to a situation where a couple of months after, folks are out, USDA is out cutting the ribbon on this facility this summer, 2 months later, you've got the facility saying they can't feed birds anymore. So something happened there. And I think it's reasonable that we should understand how and why and when and all of those types of things. So I those are things that will come over time, I believe. Look, the situation is we were, unfortunately, we had to step in and take over control of some birds, and 1.3 million birds to be exact. And we understand about 700,000 between Minnesota and Wisconsin. So this was a 3-state issue. In Iowa, we do have provisions in our law that allow the state, the Department of Ag, to take custody of those animals if we believe that there is an animal welfare, a neglect situation that's coming, that we can step in and feed those animals. We do so under court order. And so I think that's the really good news for Iowans, is that we have to ask permission from the court to do that. Then we have to ask permission from the court or show the court how we're going to operate. And at the end, we have to then send a report that shows exactly what we did. So it's all a very transparent process, as it well should be, that you will be able to, folks will be able to read those court filings and know exactly what we went through. So we tried to find a way to market those birds. And unfortunately, because of, and we actually did have a processor that was willing to do so, but because of lien holders and some legal issues and claims and legal uncertainty for that processor, they did unfortunately back away, and which left us with no viable options, and no other state found a viable option either to process. And so we had to take the very unfortunate step, which is the absolute last resort, is that we had to euthanize those birds because there was no way to market them. There's no excess processing capacity. There's no open market for broilers really to speak of. And so we had to take that step, and that was concluded last week. But we were able to, as the state, step in to pay for the feed, pay the producers to continue to care for those animals, and to be able to help offset those disposal and euthanasia costs as well. And I want to stress this too. We did so using the AVMA, the American Vet Med Association guidelines. We had veterinarians on staff to ensure that it went well and went exactly as it needed to, and that we were able to swiftly take action to euthanize these birds in a humane way. So it's a terrible situation to think that those birds were wasted. How did we get into this situation? Why did this happen? I think those are now the things that we need to be focused on.
And it's hard enough when we think about what's been going on, the battles we've been fighting in those barns to keep those animals healthy from avian influenza and things like that. And to see these farmers just be basically heartbroken. Yes, we know that in the end, these animals are being processed to be eaten, but to sit and watch something that didn't need to happen, and something that technically is very preventable, unlike a disease where if it happens, unfortunately, you have to take care of it. But this is something these farmers had to watch these animals not be fed for days before anything could be done. And I know Iowa and Minnesota worked as hard as they could. Boy, did it expose some shortcomings in the power that Wisconsin had in this situation. But it's one of those things that those animals some of them went a week without eating, and then animals being animals, they're going to find a way to survive. And unfortunately, they turn to some means that aren't necessarily things we like to think about.
Well, and I can't speak for what happened in other states, but I will tell you that in Iowa, because when we were made aware that the situation had turned, that they were not able to feed the birds, we acted swiftly. And so really the outages of feed were very minimal. And again, that's why we stepped in. That's why we went to the court to do that, because of all the things that you just talked about. But these are always times to learn something too. So we would say other states are probably looking at us and saying, well, we maybe like to have what Iowa had. We had a situation though where we were not able to successfully market these birds. And so we've got to look at our laws and figure out, are there ways that we could streamline this as well? So lessons to be learned for sure. But I'll back up and say I appreciate your comments about the producers. I mean, I always think whether it's a foreign animal disease like high-path avian influenza, or whether it's this situation, farmers get up every day, they go and they care for animals. They're trying to keep them healthy. They're trying to keep them productive. And then to see them have to be euthanized, have to see that kind of tough situation, that is tough. That's hard for those producers. They care for things. They're raising them for a purpose. And then to see the waste, that doesn't sit well, I think, with anybody. Again, it's why we need to now shift and say, well, what did we learn? Why did this happen? How did this happen? And how can we prevent this type of thing from happening again? And then those folks need to be held accountable, both again within the company and anywhere else where things went wrong. We need to make sure that there's accountability there and that we learn from these lessons so we don't have to do this again.
Yeah, and it's definitely been interesting, the call from lawmakers from all three states, kind of looking at this saying, all right, what can USDA also do? I mean, it's not just a matter of cutting a check and walking away, which is not by any means what they did. But there's a lot of questions of what's the oversight, what's the criteria that has to be met before these things are invested in with some of these grant dollars and things like that. And so there's calls into where can things be tightened up so we don't see something like this happen again.
Absolutely, because the goal of having more processing is a good one, right? We want more processing capacity. But then it's the question of how do you do it? And look, I would say this about any government intervention, right? We do grant programs here at the Iowa Department of Ag as well. And I think we are always holding ourselves to a high standard in terms of are those dollars being well spent? I don't care if it's economic development, if it's these USDA dollars. I don't care what category or what amount of funding it is. If we're going to be using taxpayer money to invest in these things, and I think there's wisdom in doing that in some fashion, because these are worthy goals, but they've got to be done. It's got to be done in a way that's top drawer, that's top notch, that gets that makes sure that that's a wise investment. So, again, I don't want to overdo that, other than to say that this was a bad situation that we need to look at the root causes and say, how do we prevent it from happening in the future?
And that was Iowa Ag Secretary Mike Naig. We're going to go ahead and take a break and hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, we'll run down those closing markets. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net.
Welcome back to Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, being joined right now by Kenan Laden of agmarket.net. Kenan, on this Tuesday, what did we see come out of that grain market?
Pretty quiet day in the markets. No real large moves within the grain market. Most of the main grains, soybean, corn, and wheat, were higher on the day, with some of the soy products, oil, and meal being down.
Now, obviously, we know the markets are watching the election going on today. So was it that just kind of that quiet status quo, only moving if they had to kind of situation?
Yeah, I would say that it's a status quo. There's a lot of information coming into the market this week with the election number one, followed by the Fed interest rate decision, followed by the WASDE report on Friday, which leads this market to kind of, just tread water here ahead of a bunch of information.
Anything that we're looking at then on the livestock side of things, those cattle and hogs, how'd they fare today?
Cattle are pretty quiet, mixed in the live cattle. Hogs were down, probably the biggest mover of the day, but they were also very quiet ahead of the news.
Okay, and so, is it just more, again, the same with the livestock side as it was with the grains, just kind of pumping the brakes, seeing what happens out of the election today, and then see what happens the rest of the week?
Yeah, that's what I would attribute it to in the livestock also. Probably the only news of note today would be on the wheat side. Within that wheat complex, conditions came out yesterday and they were the second lowest on record in those winter wheat planted areas, but there's good rains, as moving through there. And then Egypt had a large wheat tender, which sold for pretty low out of Ukraine underbidding Russia. But other than that, most of the markets across the board have kind of just been have that feel of a wait and see what happens today.
All right. Well, Kenan, if folks want to pick the brains there of anybody at agmarket.net and kind of get some ideas of what they should do for their marketing plans or think about some of their grain marketing options, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, check us out on the web at agmarket.net and look for a broker in your area and check out some of our egg market intel.
All right. Well, Kenan, thanks so much for joining us. Look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Dustin.
And that was Kenan Laden of agmarket.net. Let's go ahead and take a look at the closing numbers on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network market screen. December corn up 2 cents at 4.18.5. January beans up 4.5 at 10.01 3/4. Soybean meal down a dime at 2.9950. Soy oil down 57 cents at 44.99. Chicago wheat up 3 3/4 at 5.72.5. Kansas wheat up 5 3/4 at 5.76 3/4. Minneapolis spring wheat up 4 3/4 at press time at 6.09 3/4. Oats up 1 1/4 at 3.91 1/4. Live cattle for December down 30 cents at 184.77. November feeders down 20 cents at 246.15. Lean hogs down $2.10 at 81.12. Pork cutouts unchanged at 94.55. And Class 3 milk down 13 cents at. And that's the end of our market recap, and that brings us to the end of today's show. You can find all our content online at iowaagnet.com, on Facebook, on X, and even on our YouTube channel. While you're there, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be notified each time we put out a video such as this. Also, don't forget about the free market podcast 3 times a day coming right to your mobile device with analysis on the openings, middays, and closings. You can find them wherever you get your favorite podcasts or online at the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network website. From the IARN studios in Des Moines, I'm Dustin Huffman. For Riley Smith, Mark Magnuson, and Andy Peterson, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.